Overtrimming horses' feet is by far the single greatest problem in horseshoeing, for farriers anyway. We may come to a foot that's already too short, like some barefoot feet are, but our job is to recognize that and foster growth rather than take away what the horse needs to walk on comfortably. The most common thing I see every day that I take on new horses or therapeutic cases is that they're cut or have worn too short from the bottom specifically. And so we learn to recognize that and learn the different landmarks and priorities to use to recognize that the foot's too short vertically, and then trim in a way that either maintains or increases vertical depth but decreases breakover. At Noble Farrier, we have 4 standard priorities, and that guides everything. And our first one always, of course, is soundness. The horse has to be comfortable. They have to be sound. They have to move well for their job and be happy. The soundness kind of rules them all because it doesn't really matter what the other ones are if the horse isn't sound. So we kind of say the horse is our judge. Whatever it takes to get them comfortable is the priority. The next priority we use is vertical depth and breakover. And they're kind of the same thing for us because we achieve vertical depth or increase or maintain vertical depth at the same time that we bring breakover back in the way that we trim. So they become kind of the same priority, and that's why we always start from the top, so that we can maintain or increase vertical depth while we decrease breakover. The third priority for us is toe length. And toe length is one of those priorities that we can always control completely. So horses will have average toe lengths for their breed, their size, things like that. We use those averages to help us double check ourselves. But our finished trim, the toe lengths should be fairly symmetrical side to side and in proportion from front to back. And the last priority is angle. And the reason that angles last is that the other priorities usually heavily influence angle. So much so that we usually achieve our angle goals with already with the first 2 priorities. So that just bringing the toe back, decreasing breakover, mechanically and physically usually increases the angle. So it ends up being not as big of a problem once we trim correctly, the problem of achieving the correct angle. All right. We're always looking for several landmarks that guide our trim. And what's the first one, Chris?
Proportion.
All right. Proportion. So that just means how the feet relate to each other and how they relate to the horse. In microcosm and macrocosm. So we always look at is the foot too small for the horse's body? Is the foot too big for the horse's body? And the other proportions can be things like the angle. Is the foot too low? Is the toe too long? So we're always looking at all the proportions right off the bat. And it gives us a really good clue about what our goals will be in our trim. All right, Chris, what's the next landmark? Texture is a great guide to help us maintain or increase vertical depth, because as we know, the number one problem in horseshoeing or farriery is trimming too much vertically and not enough horizontally. So we follow the hoof has definite textures as you go through the layers of sole that are completely predictable and reliable, so that when you get to where you're starting to get too short, it has a certain texture and it tells you to stop. What's the next one? Patterns. that landmark, we call it patterns, but really patterns is a really general way to think about horses in general. And pretty much every aspect of horses you can think about in patterns. Stepping, it's got me pinned down. So we're looking at, there's a multitude of patterns, and for us, the highest priority pattern to figure out is the high-low front feet. Which one's high, which one's low. Sometimes it's really obvious. Sometimes it's not as obvious, but it's always there. So we figure out that pattern, and that leads us to look at other patterns. And patterns are basically predictable relationships between feet and the horse's body and their feet, and the horse's feet and their legs, and everything you can think about comes in patterns. And the more experienced and educated a particular farrier gets, the easier it is to identify the patterns at deeper and deeper levels, or like peeling the onion layers away, and you learn the innermost patterns, the innermost subtle patterns. All right, Chris, what's the next one? Shape. Shape is actually an aspect of patterns, but shapes are landmarks, because you know, if a foot doesn't have a normal shape or a normal pattern to its shape, then probably something's wrong. And it's a landmark because it helps us check our priorities, or check our trim, and make sure we're doing it correctly. And also can use shape as a guide to see your whether you're headed in the right direction or not, based on the changes in shape. So as a shape becomes prettier, you know you're probably headed in the right direction. As shape becomes uglier, you're pretty sure you're not headed in the right direction. And then front and hind feet have very definite shapes to them, usually. And so if they're distinguishable, then you're probably doing pretty good. If they don't look like normal front or hind shapes, then something's probably a little off, and you just want to judge your success or your path or your goals by how nice the shapes become, how normal the shapes become, I guess. It's a good one. All right. What's the next one, Chris? Color. Color is a kind of another aspect of texture, because always, you know, our goal is to maintain or increase vertical depth and reduce breakover generally. And the texture, the layers of sole, come in textures, and they also come in colors. And so the color also helps us define kind of where we are in a vertical sense in that horse's foot, and helps us know when to stop. And the closer we get to sensitive tissue, the lighter the color becomes. So that also is very consistent landmark that we use in trimming to help us maintain vertical depth. Is there any more? That's it, folks. Yeah. Okay.